Hi, my name is Wei from Colorway Fiber Arts, and today I wanted to talk to you about gauge. And quickly, before I get into technical shots of counting stitches, gauge is one of those things that people can't stand. I'm looking at you, Angela. There are things that we have to do in our lives as knitters called gauge swatches. They are little time sucks of just annoyance that nobody wants to do. Right? We all have the immediate gratification need of casting on that new project, seeing progress, and then figuring out what's wrong afterwards. We've all done it. We've all been there. Okay, I know it. And as a former yarn shop owner and helper of people, one of the biggest things that would happen is somebody inevitably would come in and say, "Way, oh my gosh, I don't know what's wrong. I'm knitting this sweater and it's supposed to be for a 2-year-old and it looks like it's for a baby doll, or it looks like it's gonna be for an adult." And we always make the joke, well, it's gonna fit somebody, which is true. But then the next thing out of my mouth is always going to be, "Did you do a gauge swatch?" And that is not the answer anyone wants to hear. They want to come in and they want me to go, "Oh, I know what the problem is. Oh, I see right here. You added an extra stitch. That's the reason this is not the right size. Let's take that out and everything will be okay." That's just really not how that happens. So inevitably, my first question is, did you do a gauge swatch? I get this. No. Well, okay. Let's talk about gauge again. Here's the secret. When you see a gauge written on a pattern, it is the designer's gauge. I keep saying this word. It means it's how tight or loose the designer knits. When I write a pattern, I'm going to write it with my preferences in mind. Okay? Perfect example are my socks. The rest of the world, standard, majority of people, I'm going to assume, this is me just making a blanket statement, I could be wrong, but a lot of people like to knit their socks on size 1 needles. That's the average that you see on patterns, size 1. Okay. This is a toe-up sock I'm starting in a size 1 needle. When I hold a ruler up to this and count my gauge, i.e., how many stitches that I knit in a size 1 needle, how many stitches make an inch for me? So for this size 1 needle and this particular sock yarn, I get a gauge of 9 stitches per inch. Now, a lot of times you'll see gauge written on a pattern or on the label of a skein of yarn, and it'll say 32 stitches and 32 rows equals 4 inches. So in theory, if you use the size needle that somebody is asking you to use on a pattern, let's just say size 8 needle, and the gauge I'm giving you is way off, by the way. This is not accurate math, but this is just what is simple enough in my head. So on a size 8 needle, I'm supposed to get 32 stitches equals 4 inches. So I cast on 32 stitches, and I knit 32 rows tall in stockinette or in garter, whatever they request. And in theory, my swatch is supposed to be 4 inches square. Well, it's not. I'm finding my swatches 5.5 inches square. Or I'm finding my swatches 3 inches square. How is this happening? Well, my little snowflakes, each one of us is different. Each one of us handles and processes our stress differently. And some of us are tight knitters, and some of us are loose. And all Gauge is doing is trying to get you to know how close you are to the author's own personal gauge. I'm still getting the overwhelming feeling from everybody, but what does it mean? Why is it important that 8 stitches equals an inch or 7 stitches equals an inch? Well, let's think about our bodies. We all have certain widths. Some of us are wider than others. Some of us are shaped differently. But the universal standard for how we knit patterns between you and myself is gauge. So, for instance, you're going to start knitting a sweater, and my sweater is 32 stitches across to equal 4 inches. And your sweater is coming out smaller. That means you actually are putting more stitches in per inch. So the tighter, the more compact, the more stitches you can pack into an inch of knitting, means that your gauge is tighter. Fewer stitches, bigger stitches, take up less room in an inch. Now, why do I keep saying an inch? I don't like working in the numbers that are 4 inches wide, right? So 8 stitches per inch, 8 times 4 is 32. So that's why I'm pulling 8 out of the air. Math. Let me preface this too by saying, if you're sitting here going, oh my God, she has said things about math, and math scares me. I have a learning disability in math. Okay. Higher level math in my brain just don't communicate well. I don't visualize the same way. I'm an artist. So when I'm going to talk to you about math, know that I'm always going to come at you from an angle of somebody who can't do math, who's figured out a trick to make life work for her. So I feel like this is the point where we'll switch camera views and let me get talking, because I don't want to get off track, and I can do that. Also, full disclosure, totally have ADD, so I apologize. You're listening to an artistic intuitive tell you how the world makes sense to her in knitting. I hope it helps. Okay, let's go. Let's count some gauge with a ruler, and let's see if it connects any dots. Hey, so we're back. Here we have my sock. And just conveniently, it happens to be 8 stitches per inch. Woohoo! But this is on a size US 2 needle. I've lined my ruler up, okay, on my knitting, and you can see I can trace the line of my row down, and so I line that up directly with the beginning of my inch measuring point, and then that triangle arrow chevron shape, right? That is 1 stitch. So what we're looking at you can see how I've stuck my needle in and I've pulled up the right leg of my stitch and the left leg of my stitch. If you can visualize with me, the stitch is coming down, going underneath these two, and then back up. So that is what forms the chevron shape that we're looking for. So let's line this back up, because we'll use this for counting rows too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? If I were to count all the way to the 2 inches, following that this is exactly 8 stitches to the inch, then I would have 16 stitches for 2 inches, and then thusly 32 stitches for 4 inches. Okay. And quickly, let's count our rows. How do we count our rows up if we are supposed to do that? 1 chevron is 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, so on and so forth. Okay. It's really helpful if you can isolate visually one section for yourself. Make your life easier. If you can isolate, if it's easy to identify one side of your braid versus the other, do that. Some of us knit differently, and our tension, I don't want to say gauge, our tension is not consistent between when we knit and, let's say, if we're knitting flat, and when we purl. And so sometimes it'll look more like this. Okay. So I've drawn, because I don't have a visual example for you. Sometimes when we knit tighter on one side and we purl more loosely on the other, our stitches won't be the even chevron shape that we're looking for. Okay, we'll have what looks like almost like a tight column that is bigger and more pronounced. Okay, and that's what this portion of the drawing is. And then you'll see the other side is tighter, and almost that it rotates inwards. And so if you look at your work and you see something more like that, know that that's just tension, and as you practice, your knitting and your purling will even out. And as they even out, they'll look more like this. Okay. So I hope this helps you identify your gauge. Thank you, Weepy. And count it. Now, there's one last thing that we need to talk about when we are talking about properly counting our gauge. I am counting my gauge on my sock fabric that has not been blocked or washed. Okay? When we talk about blocking a piece, blocking is the act of getting your fibers wet and setting them in place. So when we talk about blocking our shawls, we want to gently wring them out, stretch and pin them so they can dry, so that if you have a lace shawl, you can enjoy the lace pattern. And every time you wash that shawl, yes, you have to lay it back out and block it and dry it if you want it to look that way. Because there's no knitting police, if you don't reblock your lace shawl, that's fine. It's up to your personal preference. And if you can't stand wearing an unblocked lace shawl in public, you'll block your shawls. How often are you washing your shawls? That's also up to you. If you care for them and fold them up and put them away every time you're done wearing them, you shouldn't have to be washing and blocking your garments that regularly. So when we say, did you block your swatch? That is the final true test of gauge, is what happens to your fabric as after you've applied water and the fibers have been allowed to relax and dry in their final setting. You are going to block your swatches as you would care for your garment. If you are going to throw your socks in the washer machine, you're going to block your gauge swatch by throwing it in the washer machine. Okay? Lay it flat or throw it in the dryer and then count your final gauge. So when my socks are washed and done, my gauge has changed just a little bit. Now, I wash and dry my super wash socks in the dryer because I can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see 8 doesn't quite line up anymore. It's more like it's more like 7.5 now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's my inch line, and it comes to the center of that chevron. So I know my final gauge on a wash swatch is 7.5 stitches per inch versus an unwashed swatch, tight before the fabric has had a chance to relax and take a breath and dry into its final state, 8 stitches per inch. Okay? When you see on a pattern, they are going to be talking about a blocked swatch, unless it states otherwise. Okay, so that's gauge. I hope that was clear. I'm gonna cut that together and see if any of that makes sense and go from there. But hopefully that helps with counting, understanding how it goes together. And I also threw in that little bit of information about counting your swatches, blocked versus unblocked as well. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making it all the way through to the end. I'm going to start saying like and subscribe, or subscribe and hit the button. I don't know. I'm just here to help. And if there's anything you want me to cover, throw it out there and I'll do my best. Thanks for watching.